Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, dear viewers. Today we'll be looking at the biography of William Shakespeare, a playwright who, for almost 20 years of his life, averaged nearly two plays a year. A poet and playwright whose works have been read, translated, analyzed, discussed, debated, interpreted, adapted the world over. So, without much ado, let us get right to it. Shakespeare was probably born on the 23rd of April 1564 at Stratford upon Avon in England. He was baptized either on the 25th or the 26th of April. His father, John Shakespeare, belonged to the yeoman class, that is, a class which owned and cultivated small landed estates, whereas his mother, Mary Arden, belonged to the next class following the yeoman, that is, the gentry. However, the fact that John Shakespeare was able to marry Mary Arden suggests that the boundaries between the two classes were permeable. The very year that Shakespeare was born, Stratford suffered from a plague outbreak during the summer and fall, and which resulted in the deaths of a lot of people. Fortunately, Shakespeare survived. Scholars who discuss and deal with Shakespeare's life often divide it into three phases. The first 20 years from 1564 to 84, the next phase for about 25 years when he was an actor and playwright in London, and the third and the last, the later years during which he returned back to Stratford. He was probably educated at Stratford Grammar School, and the education he received was likely free of cost given the fact that his father was involved in the town establishment. He left school in 1579 at about the age of 15. This is also the time period when his father was struggling with financial difficulties, and as a result, Shakespeare would have taken up a job either as a school teacher or a law clerk or a gardener, and if nothing of these, then as an assistant to his father, who was a glover and dealer in commodities. In 1582, he had an affair with Anne Hathaway, a woman who was 8 years older to him, and the affair resulted in a pregnancy. They were hastily married, and in May 1583, their daughter Susanna was born. In February 1585, their twins Judith and Hamnet were born. The years from about 1584 or 85 to 1592 are known by Shakespeare scholars as the dark years, the years during which hardly any documentary evidence about Shakespeare's life is available. One 17th century theory goes that Shakespeare was a butcher and that he was known to kill a calf. However, it has now been established that the phrase to kill a calf was an Elizabethan slang referring to some sort of comic routine on the stage. Another 18th century theory goes that he was caught poaching by Sir Thomas Lucy and had to flee to London as a fugitive. Another theory argues that he was a soldier either in the Netherlands under the Earl of Leicester, or that he was involved in fighting the Spanish Armada in 1588. Some have speculated that he worked in the London publishing industry. Perhaps the most interesting of all these theories is that Shakespeare was training to be a Catholic priest in Lancashire. This theory perhaps gained prominence from the fact that Stratford itself was a center of secret Catholicism during this time, at a time when the entire nation was Protestant, and being a Catholic was almost equal to treason, and even priests could be put to death for practicing Catholicism. Several of Shakespeare's teachers, on the other hand, were Catholics or were involved in Catholic activities, including John Cotton. And John Cotton was involved with a man in Lancashire by the name of Alexander Houghton. And the will that Alexander Houghton left behind mentions two men, and one of the name resembles that of Shakespeare. The government discovered the Lancashire Centre and it was destroyed. However, due to this connection, it has been speculated that Shakespeare was perhaps training to be a priest, a Catholic priest in Lancashire. There were several traveling companies that visited Stratford during this time. The Leicester's men were there in 1586, the Queen's men in 1587. But there is no record or evidence that these companies recruited on the road. So even if Shakespeare was interested in playwriting or acting, he would have had to go to London for the same. Whatever the case may be, he was in London from somewhere about 1589 and was already established both as an actor and playwright by 1592, given the fact that Robert Greene attacks him in his Groat's Worth of Wit, a pamphlet that was published in 1592. Greene attacks Shakespeare along with Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Nash, and George Peele. The authorship of Groatsworth of It, on the other hand, itself has been contentious, it has been debated because the printer and the publisher who arranged for its publication, Henry Chettle, had transcribed the manuscript after Green's death. It was published a few weeks after Green's death, and it has been believed that it was actually Chettle who wrote it. However, in the very same year, in 1592, when Chettle publishes his Kind Heart's Dream, he denies this in the preface of the book, and he mentions two playwrights who were offended by Green's pamphlet, and he offers an apology to one of them. And scholars and critics have speculated that the one who Chettle is apologizing to is none other than Shakespeare. These are some of Shakespeare's early works. What is noteworthy about them is that Elizabethan drama scholars have now come to agreement that often was written in collaboration, and Shakespeare himself was likely a part of some such teams. So Titus Andronicus and Edward III, for instance, are plays where it is believed that he collaborated with George Peele. The first part of the Henry VI trilogy was also probably written in collaboration, though scholars have found it difficult to identify the collaborator. These are some of the acting companies that Shakespeare was associated with throughout his career, both as an actor and playwright. In 1592, there was a plague outbreak in London which forced the closure of theatres for about 2 years. And during this time, Shakespeare turned to writing book length poems. The two, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, were dedicated to the Earl of Southampton. Uh, this is a time period when writers often used to rely on patrons for rewards and financial backing, and Shakespeare also might have felt the need to find a good, suitable patron given the plague outbreak. The first preface, that is that of Venus and Adonis, is customary of the time. It is flattering to the patron, it is self deprecating. But the second one, the dedication of the rape of Lucrece, suggests that a warm friendship has developed between the two men. And this is perhaps the only aspect of Shakespeare's life where scholars agree that the two men shared a warm friendship without any other documentary evidence. By 1594, when the theaters reopen, Shakespeare also returns to the theater. One could speculate as to the reasons of the return, that he did not always want to rely on the generosity of the patrons, or that he loved the theater so much that he couldn't turn completely away from it. Whatever the reason, he returns, and by this time, Strange's Men has reorganized themselves as the Chamberlain's Men, and Shakespeare remains with this company for the rest of his career. These are some of his early successful works with the Chamberlain's Men, and there is documentary evidence that when the Chamberlain's Men shifted from the northern part of the city to the southern part, Shakespeare also moved along with them or shifted along with them. The 1590s and the early 1600s is also the time when Shakespeare was engaged in creating and writing and composing his sonnets, which are 154 in total, which were published in 1609. Now, whether these sonnets constitute an actual love triangle between Shakespeare or the speaker, another man, and a woman, or whether Shakespeare was merely interested in the genre of unrequited love, often explored in sonnets, is a question that can be discussed and debated. But what it proves is that apart from writing plays, he was also in pursuit of other literary avenues. From 1596 to the death of Queen Elizabeth I, these are some of the works that he writes, including Hamlet and Julius Caesar. This time period is also noteworthy for several achievements in his life as well as several painful events. In 1596, his father was awarded a coat of arms. Now, these kinds of rewards were given out to a family for special services to the nation, but at others they were also bought by giving out the fees or the money. And it is likely that Shakespeare also must have paid the amount for receiving the coat of arms. In 1597, he buys a new mansion in Stratford called New Place. In 1598, an edition of Love's Labours Lost is published that contains his name, that mentions his name, which attests to his rising fame and reputation as a playwright. In 1599, he becomes a partner in the Globe Theatre. On the flip side, there are a few painful events as well. The most noteworthy being in 1596 when his son Hamnet dies at the age of 11. During the reign of James I, Shakespeare writes Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, and he is also collaborating. For instance, in Pericles, he collaborates with George Wilkins for Timon of Athens, which has been left unfinished. He collaborated with Thomas Middleton. And in 1608, the Globe Theatre acquires the Blackfriars Theatre, and this new acquisition has more scenic capabilities. The crowd that comes there is more sophisticated, and Shakespeare also responds with coming up with a new genre which scholars have labeled or identified as the late romances. All the late romances share certain similarities. For instance, tragic elements are there at the beginning of the play, but by the end, they are happily resolved. Young lovers are a part of the plot, but they are not central to the plot. Rather, older men feature prominently into the plays. There are magic and fantastical elements that are used. Even here, Shakespeare collaborates with John Fletcher in The Two Noble Kinsmen, Cardenio, the play which has been lost. Some scholars group Henry VIII with the history plays, some group it with the late romances, but these are the plays that he collaborated with John Fletcher. William Beeston, who was the son of Christopher Beeston, an actor and an acquaintance of Shakespeare, says that his father recollected Shakespeare as a man who was very witty, a man who kept to himself, who knew Latin very finely, a sort of a man who would not be debauched, who would not easily be tempted by the various vices. By 1607, in 1607, his daughter Susanna marries a prominent Stratford physician by the name Dr. John Hall, and in 1608 he becomes a grandfather. His granddaughter Elizabeth Hall is born. By 1610 or latest by 1612, scholars speculate that he was back to Stratford, and by now he is a prominent local leader. Preachers who used to visit Stratford during important religious days used to stay at his place. He invested in Stratford real estate, and he probably planted the town's first mulberry tree because it was James I's desire to compete with the Chinese silk industry. and wanted to encourage silkworm cultivation in England. In January 1616, Shakespeare's lawyer Francis Collins prepares the first draft of his last will and testament. In February 1616, his daughter Judith marries the controversial Thomas Kinney, and as a result, Shakespeare redrafts the will to protect his daughter's share from the husband. This redrafted will is signed on the 25th of March 1616. Shakespeare dies on 23rd April and he is buried at the Holy Trinity Church on 25th April 1616, exactly 52 years after his baptism. Because few details are or few concrete details are available about his life, scholars and readers and critics and fans have tried to piece together a more coherent psychological portrait of the author uh, through his works. But the question that arises is that can the beliefs, attitudes, opinions, etc., of his characters that we find in the plays be actually attributed to him? So, for instance, if one reads the history plays or the Roman plays, one could argue that Shakespeare is a political conservative who discourages rebellion and revolution. And this is very much likely because the 16th and 17th century England is going through a very difficult time, going through a very difficult phase. It's a new Protestant state, whereas the entire continental Europe is Catholic. There are issues of internal strife as well. Civil war is possible. The War of the Roses has already taken place. The Essex uprising takes place during Shakespeare's time. Uh, Other scholars, for example, who read his sonnets speculate about his sexuality. Was he bisexual or a homosexual or a heterosexual? Because the Shakespeare, as we mentioned a few minutes back, the sonnets contain a love triangle, a sort of a love triangle between two men and a woman. Others, for example, turn to the Winter's Tale. They read the play as Shakespeare's comment on his own married life. However, to contrast this, if we read the plays in comparison to the sonnets, we find that Shakespeare's heroines, such as Juliet and Rosalind and Perdita, are very much involved with or talk about sex and sexuality. And the plays often celebrate heterosexual love and result or culminate in marriages. So, if we read the sonnets, was he a homosexual? If we read the plays, is he a heterosexual? So, depends on which side of the coin you are looking at. But certain things can be gleaned, no doubt, if we are judicious enough. For example, if we read the plays, we might realize that he was aware about his advancing age. Because Romeo and Juliet is written around the time he was 30, and they are young, they are uh, lovers, but by the time you come to Othello and Desdemona, they are married, they are mature, they are in control of their surroundings, if not themselves, in comparison to Romeo and Juliet. And by the time we come to Antony and Cleopatra, they are further mature than Othello and Desdemona. So Shakespeare himself was perhaps aware about his advancing age, is what we can glean by reading the plays in succession or in chronology. This has been the primary source for the presentation. I hope this has been useful, and now you can further go to different sources to add to this. As always, your suggestions, your comments are welcome. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.